Homelander presents one of television's most psychologically complex villains, not because he's mysteriously evil, but because his pathology follows such tragically predictable patterns from his origins. So come along with me while we move beyond the surface, he's the evil Superman trope, and let's read into what's actually happening with him psychologically. Homelander meets clear criteria for narcissistic personality disorder of the malignant type, as described by Otto Kernberg. What's fascinating is the comorbidity with his brief psychotic episodes. And I know everybody's giving side eye because he seems like all of his episodes are psychotic, but follow along with me. Those conversations with himself in the mirror aren't just theatrical device, they represent what Kernberg calls psychotic kernels within narcissistic structure, moments where reality testing fails under narcissistic injury. Homelander's mirror conversations specifically match what Bromberg describes as dissociative splitting, creating an internalized other who provides the validation the external world threatens to withdraw. Homelander's origin story is a tragic one. It's a near perfect storm for creating this specific type of pathology. The sensory deprivation upbringing parallels Harry Harlow's isolation experiments, which showed that primates raised without touch develop severe aggression and inability to read social cues. But Vought went further. They provided intermittent, good enough caring through Dr. Vogelbaum, creating what Maine and Solomon identified as disorganized attachment. The child simultaneously seeks and fears the caregiver. The Romanian orphanage studies by Michael Rutter found that children institutionalized past age 2 showed persistent quasi autistic features and indiscriminate friendliness alternating with aggression. Sound familiar? Homelander's desperate need for crowd adoration combined with his contempt for those same crowds follows this exact pattern. Research by Shore on right brain development shows that without consistent early mirroring, the orbitofrontal cortex, which is responsible for emotional regulation, literally doesn't develop properly. This creates what Peter Fonagy calls mentalization deficits, which is the inability to understand that others have inner lives separate from their own needs. This explains why Homelander genuinely seems confused when people don't love him after he terrorizes them. It's not just entitlement. His brain may literally lack the hardware to process other people as separate beings rather than need fulfilling objects. While easy to mock as infantile, his breast milk consumption represents something more complex than oral fixation. Research on oxytocin and attachment by Feldman shows that early oxytocin exposure through nursing creates templates for all future intimate bonds. Homelander's artificial feeding in the lab denied him this neurochemical foundation. His adult breast milk consumption appears to be what Kantian calls self-medication, attempting to provide himself the neurochemical regulation his brain never learned to produce naturally. Studies on adults with severe attachment disorders show they often develop unusual self-soothing behaviors that attempt to recreate missing developmental experiences. Kernberg differentiates malignant narcissism from simple narcissistic personality disorder through 4 features: narcissistic personality, antisocial behavior, egocentric aggression, and paranoid tendencies. Homelander exhibits all 4 across the board, but what's crucial is understanding why. His paranoia isn't delusional. Vought literally did manipulate his entire life. This creates what researchers call justified paranoia, which paradoxically becomes more dangerous than delusional paranoia because it has a kernel of truth. Williams and Gilham's research on depressive realism shows that traumatized individuals often have more accurate threat detection, but overextend it to non-threatening situations. Here's where typical psychological frameworks need adjustment. Research by Bobiak and Hare on corporate psychopathy shows that individuals with antisocial traits who possess exceptional abilities often have their pathology reinforced rather than challenged. Homelander's powers mean he never experienced what Linehan calls natural consequences, which is the environmental feedback that shapes pro-social behavior. Studies on acquired sociopathy after ventromedial prefrontal cortex damage show that people who lose consequence processing abilities developed Homelander-like behavior: immediate gratification seeking, inability to learn from punishment, and emotional decisions without future consideration. Homelander's relationship with Madison Stillwell represents what John Beebe calls pathological mother complex, which is seeking the all giving mother while raging against the withholding mother, unable to integrate that they're the same person. Research on maternal erotic transference by Diana Diamond shows that adults who missed critical developmental periods often sexualize their attempts to get maternal care. But notice how he can't actually have sex with her while maintaining the mother fantasy. This matches research on segregated systems where incompatible attachment needs are kept separate to prevent system collapse. His violence follows what is called predatory aggression rather than affective aggression. The laser eyes violence is cold, controlled, sometimes even playful. This isn't rage, it's what can be described as narcissistic restoration through destructiveness. Each killing temporarily restores his sense of omnipotence. Research by Bushman on narcissistic aggression shows that narcissists don't just lash out when insulted. They specifically target sources of narcissistic injury with calculated destruction aimed at restoring superiority rather than expressing emotion. The tragic reality is that Homelander represents what Kernberg calls untreatable malignant narcissism, not because the condition itself is untreatable, but because treatment requires acknowledging vulnerability, which triggers such catastrophic narcissistic injury that violence becomes inevitable. Studies on therapeutic outcomes for malignant narcissism show that without capacity for genuine remorse, which requires the mentalization Homelander never developed, treatment becomes impossible. His brain literally lacks the structures that psychotherapy would need to build upon. What makes Homelander brilliant as a character study is how the show resists redemption arcs. Research on how viewer empathy by Keene shows we desperately want to humanize villains to find their redemptive core. But Homelander represents something more honest. Some psychological damage creates individuals who are simultaneously deeply human in their pain and genuinely dangerous in their incapacity for change. He's not evil. Yeah, he's completely evil, but he's also something more tragic, a perfectly predictable outcome of profound developmental trauma combined with unlimited power and zero accountability. Every violent act, every narcissistic rage, every desperate grab for love follows established psychological patterns documented in decades of research. The horror isn't that he's inhuman, it's that he's exactly what psychological research would predict from his very specific origins. That's what makes him truly terrifying.